You're listening to Beyond the Sermon, the podcast of First Methodist Church in Collingswood, New Jersey. On our podcast, the goal is not just to share the sermons we've preached, but to go beyond the sermon and talk about what we're learning and what God is doing in us and in our community. So it's been a little bit of time, Jeremy, since you and I sat down together, just the two of us. Last week, we got to sit down with a couple of the young adults who went to Passion. We took a little Christmas break. Had a conversation with Will in there because you were somewhere.
I was in Mexico.
You were in Mexico.
Yep.
So it's been a minute since we've sat down together. Did you have a good Christmas? Good New Year?
It's all blur.
Yeah.
Past month, but I remember there being good moments and happiness around Christmas, like nothing bad. So I'm assuming it was great. Yeah.
We didn't have anybody end up in the emergency room or the hospital this year, so that was automatic upgrade. Automatic upgrade. No, it was nice. We had a good. It was still busy. There were wrestling tournaments. There were family things. There were people we wanted to see and that kind of stuff. But in some ways, it was just a little quieter. We intentionally chose in some ways to do less. After last year, when we couldn't all be together on Christmas.
Yeah.
It was a really high priority for us to be together as the six of us. Also knowing that, Tim graduates high school in the spring and, things change when you go off into college.
You're going to leave the nest.
Yeah. Might meet a girl someday and go home for Christmas and,
By next Christmas.
It could happen. I mean, I'm pretty sure I came home my freshman year for Christmas, but one of my years of college, I didn't even go home.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I went to Ecuador for a month instead over Christmas break. And
just had to have those guinea pigs.
Yeah. Yep.
Christmas is always a unique, weird time since being in ministry.
Yeah.
Where it's like blending even and then marriage, right? Blending two sets of tradition, and then also the things that go into ministry in that month.
Yeah, like the church tradition where you're serving and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, all of that, and then this year having to go to Mexico to take care of some personal stuff, and mixed in, and then Passion was a little earlier this year, so New Year's Eve we were flying out with the college kids, and so it all just kind of happened like back to back, and but the boys had a good Christmas and playing with all the dinosaurs and trains, and your boy's leaving.
Yeah.
How's that?
It's heavy. It's good. It's what we've aimed for, right? To have kids who grow up, mature, know where they feel like they're headed in life, and leave the nest to do it, right? So it's good in that sense, but it's hard. It's a lot of things shifting, so we're enjoying all that we can, prioritizing as much of his senior year of wrestling as we can.
Destroying everybody in his path.
He is, he's doing pretty well. I'm not going to say I'm counting down the number of matches we have left to watch him, but it is 23.
What as a pastor, and I don't like it, but like the terms that pastors use of like casting vision. What vision are you casting for our congregation this calendar year?
I think my goal this year, or at least in the first half of this year, because I haven't necessarily thought through the entire year. I don't usually think about the second half of the year until we're coming up on summer, and especially over the summer, trying to really pray through what we're doing. But in the first half of this year, which unlike some other years took me a while to settle in on, I think probably 3 of the last 4 years over the summer I've prayed about what to preach, what kind of vision to cast through preaching, since that's the primary way I speak to the whole congregation. I've kind of had a whole school year sketched out by the end of the summer. This year that wasn't the case, and it's only been in the last few weeks that the rest of this school year has kind of fallen into place. I think what I'm feeling led to is encouraging our people to get closer to God.
What?
Obviously, always the goal, but
Radical.
getting closer to God in such a way that we can withstand and flourish as a church no matter what comes in the future. And so that's why in this opening series for the first year, we're talking about hearing God, because I think that's such a key part of what it means to walk with God, and is going to be foundational for some of the other things we talk about this year. So like, we have to walk with God. We have to recognize his voice. We have to know where he's leading us, because as we're going to talk about in Lent, part of the call is to deny ourselves, right? To take up our cross and follow Jesus. That's what he told us, right? And so if we're going to listen to what Jesus told us, then there's an aspect of self-denial to this call to follow him. And that has to walk a fine line, a tightrope, right between legalism on one side, where we say as a church, everybody has to do this, and just a free-for-all of, I can do whatever I want because of God's grace, right? So we see that talked about in Romans and other places. We're not free to do what we want because we have been bought with a price. And so figuring out what it is that God is asking us as part of a community, but also as individuals, where he's asking us to deny ourselves, where those things that we're prioritizing are becoming maybe even idols in our lives. Walking with God, hearing his voice, helps us figure out what it means, where Jesus is asking us to deny ourselves. And then after Lent, we're going to jump into a series on spiritual gifts. And the Holy Spirit, and what it means to not just hear from God, but to live in the gifts and the power and the authority that God has given us as his people. And so I'm excited about that, because I think a lot of times we talk about volunteering for the church and getting people to serve within the church, and we need you because we need a warm body to fill that role, and that's really...
We accept cold ones too.
gross.
Not necessarily dead. There's a lot of people that are very cold.
Well, that's true. But how much better to be able to say, all right, let's help you figure out what the gifts God has given to you, not just like the natural gifts, as important as they are, and that plays a role, not just the skills you've picked up over life, but where has God specifically gifted you spiritually so that the church can be built up and the believers can be equipped to do the ministry that God has called us to do, like it says in Ephesians 4. And I think when we can do that, when we can operate as the church the way God intended for us to, it goes better. We can live into what he's called us to as a church more. We can be who he's called us to be more. Listen, I think that's going to be a growing process. I don't think in a 6 or 8 or 10 week series we're going to plumb the depths of what that means and have it all figured out. I think there's going to need to be some grace in there as people figure it out, as people learn how to operate in their spiritual gifts, because that's not something that you just wake up one morning and it's like a light switch flipped on.
Nope.
It's kind of similar to hearing God, right? It's because it's flowing out of a relationship, that relationship has to develop, right? God has to develop the character within us that can hold those things, right? The church gets into trouble when people's gifting outpaces their character development. And that's where a lot of pastors run into trouble.
Yep.
Because they focus so much on developing the skills, or maybe they've clearly been given some spiritual gifts, but they spend more time working on those, focusing on those things than they do on their own relationship with God, on their own character development. And they get to a point where, it just tips the scales and it's unhealthy.
Yeah.
So that's a very long answer.
Perfect. We need to fill space.
A very long answer about what the vision is, but I hope those pieces kind of help people see where we're headed and why, and they're not so distinct from each other as they might seem on the surface. Right? I think the hearing God is key to the self-denial, and I think the self-denial is key to being the kind of people that God can entrust with his power.
Yeah, what was the quote you used this Sunday about like the importance of hearing God? I can't remember. You had a couple quotes.
Two of them. Yeah, one from Pete Greig and one from Dallas Willard.
Do the Pete Greig one. No, I'm not talking about the dangerous one.
Yeah, that quote from early on in the book, How to Hear God, A Simple Guide for Normal People, says, learning to hear God's voice, his word and his whisper, is the single most important thing you will ever learn to do. I'm not exaggerating. Hearing God is not peripheral. It is integral to human history. Neither is it an optional extra for wild-eyed mystics and those who happen to be spiritually inclined. Hearing God is essential to the very purpose for which you and I were made. Without it, everything falls apart.
How have you seen that quote bear truth in your own life?
Gosh, in so many ways. Life is better when I listen to God. It's not always easier, but it's always better. I mean, it's kind of like that story I shared at the end of my sermon on Sunday about the meeting and the PT and oversleeping. And, was it easier to make that choice? No, not necessarily. But was it better because it aligned with what God was inviting me into? Absolutely. Have these last few days since that meeting been better? Probably. Because in the midst of it, I was able to continue to deepen that relationship with God. Right? So many times I think we hear from God, and it's like the answer we don't like on the Magic 8 Ball. So we don't do it. And we shake it up hoping it'll come out different, and it doesn't. And then we wonder why we stop hearing from God. When the reality is, if in a relationship, if I share something with you and ask you to do something, or, share something, and you don't actually do anything with that information or that request, well, my trust in you is going to diminish. So it's always better. And I think this year, one of the things I'm learning, which seems like a no-brainer, and seems like something that, as a almost 42-year-old pastor who's been in ministry for, a couple decades now, you would think that I would have learned, but I really feel like one of the things God's working on in me this year is trust. Not just belief, not just knowing all the right things, not just assenting to all the right things, but actually trusting, actually putting the weight of my being, of my life, of my choices onto who I know God to be and how he's asking me to respond. And so a couple of the verses that have just been going through my heart and mind last week or two come from Psalm 20, verse 7, where it says, some trust in chariots, some in horses, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. And then the second one comes from Isaiah 26. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. Yeah, so just that idea of trusting God, not myself, not my own abilities, not even the people around me, but trusting God to do what God has said he's going to do. and being steadfast in that trust. And steadfast just means, constant and consistent and persistent in that trust. That's where we find peace.
I know the past couple of years you've had like a word of the year that you feel like God's put on your heart.
Yeah, it's trust for this year.
Okay.
And those are the 2 verses that he led me
I want to clear. I didn't know there's a bonus one, or if trust was the bonus one and something else.
That's one of the things I was feeling kind of frustrated's too strong, but somewhere in that direction was because I didn't feel like I had heard a word for this year. Similar, I was struggling to know what this first sermon series was going to be. There was this 6-week gap in my sermon planning. That. And I hate that. I hate that. But it was just in the last week or so that these verses came to my mind, and this invitation to trust, even on Friday, was kind of reiterated. And so, holding on to that for this year, and excited to see what God is going to do. Might be a little strong.
I'd say it's
but I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
To see how God is going to work in the midst of that, and with that kind of framework in mind.
Yeah. Almost, I hate how the last person used this word, but trepidation of like the nervous anticipation, because similar to like, well, if you pray for patience, God's gonna provide things that require a lot of patience.
Been there, done that.
And in regards to trust, that there's probably going to be some big things in which require a lot of trust.
Yeah.
And so I the hope, and also excited to see how God uses those areas in which you entrust him. Maybe not enjoy the process in which you're called to do it.
But it'll be better.
For sure. It always is. Even if we don't see the immediate results of that trust.
Well, that's our conversation for today. But that doesn't mean the conversation is over. We'd love to hear your thoughts on these topics as well. To ask a question about anything we've discussed in this episode, or to join the conversation, you can head over to fumccollingswood.org/podcast. Thanks for being part of this conversation.